if we start looking at this notion of bias, then that suggests that we've got issues of data technologies affecting people in negative ways, which introduces the notion of trust. And we start looking at this. What is trust about? Trust is about believing in others that they will not harm you, that you will not be exposed to harm. If that is the case, then if we are going to trust is a relational word, and it draws attention to commitment.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Engatica's interview series. I'm your host Palak and we are happy to have you join us today. Today we have Stephen Harwood, founder of TechnoForeSight on the show. Welcome, Stephen.
Good morning, Happy New Year and welcome to Edinburgh.
Thank you so much. We are happy to have you on the show today. The Engatica interview series is a powerhouse of insights from industry experts and influencers from around the world, a platform that provides the latest news on AI, automation, and technologies that will help you grow your business. Come be a part of our community, learn, share, and grow with us. So, Stephen, just to start off with the questions, you have written about the kingdom of digital era. Can you throw some light on the topic?
Yes, I wrote this article because I got very frustrated because lots of people were talking about businesses must become more data-centric. And I'll start, I've got a long experience of industry, business, and the rest of it. And, when we start looking at businesses, businesses have always been data-centric. We go back 4,000 years, they were recording inventory on clay tablets. So the notion of business having to go data-centric is something that a phrase that I feel really strongly about in terms of it's a nonsense. What we're thinking about is the fact that we are now looking at an era where the form of data is very, very different. And just to give you an illustration of this, we start thinking about it in terms of the amount of data that was being produced in, say, around 2012. We have something like 6,500 exabytes being produced. We start looking at the amount of data that's anticipated to be around in 2025. We're talking something like 180,000 zettabytes. That is something like 27 times greater. And then we start looking at the speed at which data is actually being generated. Then we're starting to look at data being generated every 12 hours, compared to what? 2019, it was being generated, the amount of data was doubling every 2 years. Sorry, I'm going to repeat that. So when we start thinking about the amount of data being generated, in 2019, it was doubling every 2 years. In 2025, it's expected to be doubling every 12 hours. When we start putting this in terms of the amount of data, it equates with something like every person in the world having 25,000 1 terabyte hard drives. That's a lot of data that has been suddenly generated over the last, 15 years or so. And it is with the increase in sensors, with the increase in the Internet of Everything, the amount of data is just going to increase more so. So when we start thinking about data becoming, or businesses becoming more data-centric, what were we really talking about? We're talking about businesses becoming more digitally data-centric. And digitally data-centric introduces a whole range of new issues. It is not about having data for the sake of data. It is about trying to understand why we're having this data. It may be that the data is being used by devices to do things, in which case that data may never be stored and is disposed of. But it may well be that we're collecting data that we're unaware of in terms of purpose for the sake of collecting it, which creates the question of, well, what is all this data? What are the questions that this data can actually answer? And we start looking at it in terms of the data that is not usable because of issues, problems with the data. Then we've got great big data swamps being generated. And then there's the amount of data that's never been generated, that's never been used, which I talked about. We're looking at the great big data graveyards that are being generated. So there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data still being collected and stored. What are we doing with it? This data-centric issue, I think, is a serious issue in terms of what we're trying to do with the data. And it really raises the question of what are the challenges? What are the questions that we're actually trying to ask? And when it comes to the reuse of data, then most data that is used doesn't get reused after about 90 days, which raises the interesting issue of, well, can this data actually serve some other purpose, perhaps moving into social impact here? Because it's not just about businesses using data, organizations using data with regard to productivity, efficiency, and the rest of it. It's also about sustainability. And when I talk about sustainability, which I think every organization should be embracing, then it's about the 3 pillars of sustainability, which is to do with not only the environmental, the green issues, but also the social impact, as well as the economic contribution to environment and society here. So sustainability becomes an important issue. So it was out of frustration with this, for all these people talking about things must be data-centric, that was the result that led me to writing this particular article here.
Okay. Amazing. So technology is not neutral. Why do you say this?
Well, we start thinking about it. Data is not neutral because we start looking at the biases introduced into the data sets that are being used for training AI. We are fully aware of the biased interpretations, the ability of facial recognition software to detect correctly some particular features, but not other, or not the features of other ethnic orientations. What we got here is the fact that there is bias in the data, but let's get down to the more basic issues of the artifacts that we associate with technology. These artifacts are designed. The values of these artifacts are designed into, or the values of the designer are designed into the artifacts themselves. So if I happen to be left-handed, I may have great difficulty dealing with an article that's designed for a right-handed person. But let's start thinking about it. We look at it in terms of the intent and the values. What is a gun? What values have been embedded in a gun? What's the purpose of a gun? Autonomous weapon systems. What are the values that underpin the idea that we want to have weapons that are fully autonomous here?
Okay, amazing. So according to you, what are the emerging technologies in 2023?
The emerging technologies, it's an interesting question. I've seen lots of people speculate about emerging technologies for 2023. Many of the speculations are very generic. But I think when we start thinking about what might be the drivers for the emerging technologies in 2023, then one of the things I do strongly believe in is we're going to be in for surprises. I'm quite sure we're going to be in for surprises. I think it's all about not so much what the individual developments are in technologies, but the new configurations of the different elements that exist that are going to lead to new possibilities here. And then that's going to be where we're going to see opportunities. So we start looking at it. I don't know what the surprises are going to be. In terms of individual technologies, well, we see what's going on in the Ukraine and the use of drones. And I think that's going to inspire people with regard to thinking about developments in drone technology. I think we're going to see developments in the side of drones as a new way forward here. Okay, my brain's just gone blank again. And let me just get notes. Okay. We start looking at it in terms of the metaverse. There's a lot to talk about the metaverse, and that's starting to take up, perhaps not in the consumer domain. I would suggest perhaps in the industrial domain. Last year we saw Siemens and NVIDIA get together in a partnership, and and their offering is now starting to become established. But if we start thinking about the metaverse, I'm starting to think about the hologram. hologram technology. If we start thinking about the metaverse is second generation immersion. First generation being virtual reality, virtual reality, which is effectively solo immersion. In metaverse, we're moving to social immersion. But I'm thinking that maybe we're going to move to a third generation of immersion, which is embodiment in a world of holograms. And I'm going to suggest that holograms are perhaps going to really be something that we're going to hear more about in the next year or so. We start thinking about it in terms of smart devices. I can see we're going to see a lot more of these, particularly in the industrial environment. But if we start looking at smart devices on the edge, talking to each other, then I think it's going to draw attention to cybersecurity issues, which we know is a growing issue here. And I think there's going to be more attention to cybersecurity issues here, which leads me on to something that is fairly topical over the last week or two, which is Chat GPT, or is it GPT chat, depending on who's using the phrase. And we're starting to see this. And I think when we start looking at this, Chat GPT, we're looking at this alongside of deep fakes and related. The ability to use artificial intelligence to create new things. It may be texts, it may be adjusting images, so that we're creating completely new, perhaps false images. It may be new art forms here. I see that really being a big issue in 2023. Anything else? Yeah, RPA.
Amazing.
We're looking at digital workers, robotic process automation. I think this is going to take off. You know, it's been around for a number of years, but with the tools that are available these days and the ease of use, we're going to see what happened 50 years ago with regard to automation and the introduction of robots, which really has taken off in the last 10 years in the physical domain, manufacturing, dealing with physical materials. We're going to see the same starting to kick off with data. Back to the data argument I raised, because when we start looking at this, RPA, robotic process automation, I think is going to transform the way we engage with data. You know, it's going to look at repetitive tasks initially, but as we start to see these devices, these tools become more intelligent, they're going to move encroach into the non-routine domains here. I think we're going to see some interesting issues on that. So with regard to emerging technologies, I think I've identified a few, but I think this is surprises that are going to be the interesting ones in terms of the configurations that emerge that lead to individual tools, technologies, or what have you.
Great. So last but not the least, are there any other sound bites you'd like to leave with the audience?
Well, yes. We're talking about data, and I talked about data bias, and then I talked about data not being neutral. I think this is an important point, because if we start looking at this notion of bias, then that suggests that we've got issues of data technologies affecting people in negative ways, which introduces the notion of trust. And we start looking at this, what is trust about? Trust is about believing in others that they will not harm you, that you will not be exposed to harm. If that is the case, then if we are going to trust is a relational word, and it draws attention to commitment. And it's about the commitment of others to not want to have people harmed. So we look at the trust commitment relationship, and I think that's an extremely important issue, because at the end of the day, what drives commitment are values. Gets back to the topic I was talking about neutrality or technology. What are the values embedded in technologies? So we start looking at this in terms of commitment. What are the values driving commitment? And is there a code of commitment, which I strongly believe organizations should have, to embed this commitment in what's going on in an organization? Then we can start to see the build up of trust. And with it, we start to see the end result, which is about well-being. Well-being within individuals in the workplace, but we go back to sustainability and we look at well-being within society. And with it, if there's well-being, by implication, there are going to be benefits to people in their well-being through attention to the environment, which draws attention to the economic aspects of it, because it's not about making lots and lots of money. It is about how whatever monies are involved are actually starting to lead to development of societal impact. It leads to the notion that it is not economic gain, but we're looking at some form of economic mechanism that ultimately leads to environmental and social impacts. I think on that note, I think that's probably a good ending point.
Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. For more content, subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders from around the globe. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you with the next expert soon.